the parsha in a nutshell. If you want to see it on your phone or something, you can read it on Chabad.org/3250, but I'm going to share it on the screen. Okay. Um, Share. Okay, so what do we have here? The name of the parsha, Bo, means come to Pharaoh, and is found in Exodus chapter 10. That's the beginning. The last three of the 10 plagues are visited on Egypt, which is a swarm of locusts devours all the crops and greenery. A thick, palpable darkness envelops the land, and all firstborn of Egypt are killed at the stroke of midnight on the 15th of the month of Nisan. That's going to be the three. In other words, the chronology is a little bit out of order because a lot of what we're going to read about the preparation for the Exodus happens on the 10th of Nisan, the 14th of Nisan, but the 10th plague, in the moment the Jewish people are freed, is the midnight of the 15th, between the 14th and the 15th. They don't actually leave Egypt till the next afternoon. But Pharaoh at midnight says, get out of here. But there's nowhere to go. It's the middle of the night. We don't want to leave. We say, we know we'll leave in the morning. We want a late checkout. We didn't leave till 12 midday. That's what the Torah says. But in the midst of this day, we leave out. We don't want to run out as if we don't want to leave as if we're, stealing our way out. We want to show that we have the permission and the right and the freedom. So we go out at midday. Nobody can protest. Okay, God commands the first mitzvah to be given to the people of Israel. We talked about this on Sunday. The first mitzvah is to establish a calendar based on the monthly rebirth of the moon, which we can talk about for a very long time. Symbolism of the Jewish calendar based on the moon, but not only the moon, it's also syncing it to the sun. We can talk about this for a while, but for right now, we'll leave it for the nutshell. We'll continue. The Israelites are also instructed to bring a Passover offering to God, a lamb or kid goat to be slaughtered, and its blood sprinkled on the doorposts and lintel of every Israelite home, so that God should pass over these homes when he comes to kill the Egyptian firstborn. The roasted meat of the offering is to be eaten that night, together with matzah, unleavened bread, and bitter herbs. Not everybody knows the origin of the name Passover. Passover is because in Egypt, there's going to be a first plague of the firstborn, which would strike everybody unless you're inside the home with the signs of the Passover offering, the blood on the doorposts and the lintel, which is the top of the two posts. And then God knows to pass over, which is a very strange thing, because if he's God and he can pass it all throughout the land of Egypt, he should have some GPS. He should know which home is the Jewish home, right? Why does he need the blood on the doorposts? But we can talk about that. But that's the name of the that's the name of the holiday commemorating that Passover. And then we're going to say later that God tells us to keep doing this every year. So every year, Passover is, in a way, a recreation of that first Passover, which is interesting. The first Passover celebration was actually not celebrating the first Exodus, but anticipating. And that's when we have the matzah. We ate the Passover bread, the Passover offering, which is basically steak, with the meat, with bitter matzah, which is bread, unleavened bread, but it was more like pita. If you want to talk about the texture, it was like a pita or a lafa, that sort of soft bread. It wasn't unleavened, so it didn't have time to rise. So it wasn't leavened bread and bitter herbs. So it actually tasted good. Instead of mustard, you have bitter herbs. So that's actually pretty tasty. But what were they celebrating? They're celebrating the Exodus that's about to happen. Usually, when do you celebrate something? After the event. And here, you celebrate it before the event. So
The night of.
the night before. So the afternoon, you offer the offering in the afternoon. You eat the offering after nightfall, before midnight. Midnight is the plague of the firstborn. So you actually finished your Seder by the plague of the firstborn. It's a debate whether they can do all night. Now we can do all night. Then it's a question if they did till midnight, all night. Either way, most people didn't stay up all night, or maybe they did, but they ate it in the first half of the night. They had the Passover feast, which is the meat of the Pesach offering, Passover offering, with matzah, with bitter herbs.
And then they went the next day.
Then midnight is the plague of the firstborn, and midnight Pharaoh comes and says, leave, comes to the Jewish area, the Jewish ghetto, or the Jewish quarter, call it what you want, and he says, everybody out. But that's the permission to leave. So in some sense, the Exodus begins at midnight because that's when we had permission to leave. But we didn't actually leave until the next afternoon. But the point is, there's a very interesting relationship between the Pesach and the Matzah and the Exodus. Is it before or is it after? Because then there's multiple stories, which is confusing because then it says, why do we eat matzah every year? Because when we left Egypt, the bread didn't have time to rise. But we already had the matzah before we left. So it's confusing, but we can straighten everything out, hopefully. The point is that we're in a way, we're celebrating the Exodus even before the Exodus, anticipating. We have faith in the freedom. We have faith that this is all going to work out. So we celebrate, but we're still slaves. Okay, we'll celebrate. We're close enough to the end that we could celebrate. Okay, the death of the firstborn finally breaks Pharaoh's resistance, and he literally drives the children of Israel from his land so hastily do they depart that there is no time for their dough to rise, and the only provisions they take along are unleavened. Before they go, they ask the Egyptian neighbors for gold, silver, and garments, fulfilling the promise made to Abraham that his descendants would leave Egypt with great wealth, which is another whole story. We discussed this on Sunday at great length about, not this past Sunday, but a few Sundays ago, about this, in a way, dishonesty. Torah keeps saying, God says, ask the Egyptians for their gold, silver, and garments, and ask or borrow, depending how you translate. So it's not so clear if we intend it, if we may believe we will give it back or not, if we're coming back or not. But that's an issue to talk about. No, I thought someone's at the door. Okay. And finally, the children of Israel are commanded to consecrate all firstborn and to observe the anniversary of the Exodus each year by removing all leaven from their possessions for 7 days, eating matzah, and telling the story of their redemption to their children. They're also commanded to wear tefillin on the arm and head as a reminder of the Exodus and the resultant commitment to God. So this is very, very interesting that the Exodus is so embedded in Jewish life that you have the Passover celebration. You also have the idea of consecrating the firstborn, which is another story, which is also not very well known, but it's a very important mitzvah, which is that the firstborns are considered to be sacred because God saved them when he killed the Egyptian firstborn. And if you have a firstborn, in many cases, not all cases, if the firstborn is a boy, not a girl, if the mother is an Israelite, meaning not the daughter of a Kohen, a priest, or a Levite. So you have a few conditions, but if you're an Israelite, then firstborn doesn't belong to you. Firstborn belongs to God. And at 30 days old, if you want to take your kid home, well, even if not, you get your kid home. But there's a mitzvah that at the 30th day, you go to the priest and you say, I want to redeem my son. I want my son to be mine. You pay them 5 coins, 5 silver coins. Today it's not cheap. It's probably more than $100, or maybe, but the price of silver goes up, a certain weight of silver. And the priest asks you, what would you prefer, your firstborn child or 5 coins? And hopefully the father says, I prefer my firstborn child, and I give you the firstborn. Purpose of this is to recognize the mitzvah, the event of the God saving the Jewish firstborn. Also, tefillin, very important mitzvah the men wear, and the tefillin have 4 paragraphs, and 2 of the paragraphs talk about commitment to God, loving God, the one God, Shema Yisrael. We say the Shema, but the last 2 paragraphs in the tefillin are talking about the mitzvah to consecrate the firstborn and the Exodus. So the point is that the Exodus is part of everyday life for the Jew. It's in a way the foundation of everything, because the Exodus teaches us, just to make one more point, when God has to introduce himself, when you think about God, what is God? So most people would say God is creator. But when you look at the 10 commandments, what's the first commandment when God wants to introduce himself to the people? He says, I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. And all the commentaries say, what? That's not God. Well, he took us out of Egypt too, but that's not the most important feature. The most important feature of God is creator. God is infinite. But God says, no, I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. Why is that the foundation? So there's all kinds of interpretations, but one interpretation is our understanding of God is that God is invested in the world, in the universe, and cares and involved. And in that sense, the story that brings that to light is not creation, because creation, you could say God created the world and then left it alone, set it in motion with laws of nature, but it doesn't mean he's involved, doesn't mean he's invested. So just talking about the creation is not the foundation of religion, because creation just means there's a God who created. But religion is much different, much more. Religion is that God wants a relationship with people because he cares about the people, and he wants them to live in a certain way, and he wants them to have a moral life. But that is not, the creation doesn't tell you that, right? So for that, you need to say God involved. Where's God involved in creation? And where is it evident to everybody? The fact that the slaves can go free. The fact that there's intervention in history, intervention into the hierarchy of society, and miraculous things happen, and unusual things happen, and slaves become free. That is the God. That's the relationship with God that we value. So therefore, yes, the Shema, the Tefillin talks about the abstract concepts, God is one, which is a philosophical point, but it's also the Exodus, which is experiential. And we experience God in history, in our lives, collectively and individually. But that's the foundation of religion. It's not just to say I believe in a God. Okay, that's not Judaism. Judaism is I believe in God that's involved in creation, that's interested in creation, that's not only transcendent but also immanent. So that is why the creation is so the story of Exodus, not creation, is so important to our understanding of Jews. And so many mitzvot that we say it's a commemoration of Egypt, and a lot of the social commandments God keeps saying, treat the convert and treat the foreigner properly because you know you were slaves in Egypt. So we keep going back to Egypt. The concept of Egypt is a big foundation in our faith, one of the pillars of our faith. Okay, so that is a little bit of the introduction. Now we can go into the details. The question is where to start from because there's so many important themes in the parsha. So in our Sunday track, we're also talking about this parsha. So I don't want to repeat anything I just said this Sunday because then that would be a little, I mean, I would love to repeat it, but Vicky already heard it. So I'm going to look at my notes here and see if there's anything that I have not said. We'll do a little review maybe, but we need some new things as well. Okay. Um, okay, let's talk a little bit. Maybe the calendar is a big theme, but we spoke about the calendar on Sunday. There's more elements we can talk about, but maybe we'll get back to that. But we could also talk about the opening of the parsha. But for now, I want to go to the Pesach offering and talk about what the symbolism is and what the symbolism is and the application, of course, because that's the most important thing. So if we turn to the story, you'll look at if you look at page 351. Okay, I want to read, with your permission, I want to read maybe from verse 3 all the way to verse, I don't know, 12 or maybe 13. Okay, 13. We'll read 11 verses. And then you get the feel for what Torah is saying, and then then we'll try to dig in and see what's really happening here. Okay, so I'm reading verse 3, top of page 351. Speak to so this is God coming to Moshe. The first of Nisan, the Exodus is the 15th of Nisan, the 14th was when you offer the Pesach offering. And in the previous verse, it said about the calendar, set up a calendar. Doesn't use those words, but he says this is the first month. So if this is the first month, it's very different than the way other people count time, and this is how you start counting months. So that's the mitzvah of the calendar. But now is the specifics. Once you note,
Is it?
no, the month of the month of the first month would be the month of Passover.
Oh, okay, more in the spring.
In the spring. The reason why we're reading it now is because we're reading the cycle just in the cycle of the Torah, but the actual events were in the spring. Now it's interesting that just to be very, very brief, when you have a lunar calendar like we have, the lunar calendar is 10 days shorter than the solar calendar because the lunar calendar is 12 and a half times 12, and you get 354. And the solar calendar, of course, 365. So it's 10 and a half or 11 days short. So when you talk about many cultures that have the lunar calendar, like the Chinese culture, the Chinese calendar and the Muslim calendar, so every year the holidays fall back 10 days. So you have the Chinese New Year's, it goes around the year. Sometimes it's winter, sometimes summer, right? Because every year, whatever date it is, it falls back 11 days. So too with Muslim holidays. The Ramadan, sometimes it's long, sometimes it's short. It all depends because it goes around the year. Because the lunar calendar is not connected to the seasons. The seasons is connected to the sun. Judaism is a specific mitzvah that actually doesn't say it here, but it says in Deuteronomy that even though here it says we follow the lunar calendar, we follow the moon, but there's a specific mitzvah to make sure to guard that Passover will fall out in the spring. And the way we do that is we add an extra month every approximately 3 years. because if the year falls back, if it falls back 10 days, a little bit more than 10 days, so 3 times you get 30. A little variation sometimes too. Then it's very calculated, and we have the math all worked out. Uh, but the point of the matter is, so that's a leap year. Leap year is not an extra day in February, but a leap year is an extra month. The Jewish calendar, right? When you say a leap year, you mean not you have an extra day, but you mean you have an extra month. And that's why Passover must be in the spring. And again, because the reason is because the renewal and nature coming back to life, that's the symbol of freedom. That's a symbol of the Jewish people being reborn. So then all ties into that. Okay, so that's a little bit, that's the first month. Now, once we have when the first month, now we'll talk about what to do specifically on the 10th day to start preparing for Passover. So speak to the entire assembly of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, they shall take for themselves each man a lamb or kid, young sheep or young goat, for each father's house, a lamb or a kid for the household. So everybody has, now, I don't know if you can eat a whole animal. I don't know. We have a problem. What happens if I can't eat a whole animal? My family cannot eat a whole animal. So what do you do? But if the household will be too small for a lamb or kid, then he and his neighbor who is near to his house shall take according to the number of the people. Everyone according to what he eats shall be counted for the lamb or kid. So if you have a family and you don't have enough people to finish up the lamb, later you'll see, God forbid, to leave the flesh over. No leftovers. Remember, there's no refrigeration either. So you have to eat it right away. So what you do is you invite another family, your neighbor, and you make a group. You have to subscribe. You make a group with your other neighbors, but you all have to eat it together. We'll see later. You have to eat it in one home, and you have to stay in that home. Wherever you're going to go to eat your Passover, that's where you're going to be for the whole night. An unblemished lamb or kid, a male within its first year, shall it be for you. From the sheep or goat shall you take it. It shall be yours for examination until the 14th day of this month. So we take it on day 10, and then you examine it. What are you examining it for? So the simple interpretation is that the interpretation is that he said earlier, it has to be an unblemished lamb. No healthy, but also externally, no cuts, there's different blemishes that would make it disqualify it. So you have to make sure it doesn't have any of those disqualifying blemishes. In any case, so you have that for 4 days. It shall be yours for examination till the 14th day of this month. The entire congregation of the assembly of Israel shall slaughter it in the afternoon. They shall take some of its blood and place it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the house in which they will eat it. They shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted over the fire. And matzot with bitter herbs shall they eat it. It's very important to eat it roasted. Very important. Why? See next verse. You shall not eat it partially roasted or cooked in water. Oh no, it has to be only roasted over fire. Its head, its legs, with its innards. Later we'll try to explain why is that so important. By the way, when you call roast today, what people call roast today is not what the Torah calls roast. Roast today is you take it and put it in a pot with some water. But from the Torah's perspective, no, if it's cooking in water, it's not roast, that's cooked. Roast, the halachic definition of roast is it has to be no liquid, directly on the fire. What today we would call, barbecued, like directly roasted. What do they call it today? On the grill. You have to be grilled, right? And God forbid, don't eat it raw, not fully cooked, or cook it in water. Oh no, that would be terrible. Why so terrible? We'll see. But in any case, they continue. You shall not leave it of it until morning, and any of it that is left until morning, you shall burn in the fire. So it has to be all eaten together at once, at one night. So shall you eat it, your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand. We're ready to go to Exodus. It's not like after the meal, everyone's tired. You got to get your kids out into the car. It's a whole thing. Who has gloves and where are your shoes and where are your boots? It takes 2 hours to get out of the house. No, when you're coming to dinner, you come with your walking stick, with your loins girded, you're ready to walk, you have shoes, and you're ready to move. But you can't move because you have to be in the house all day. So it's funny. So you're ready to go out, but you can't leave. But it shows that you're not that you're ready to move. That's what it shows, right? You shall eat it in haste. It is a Pesach offering to Hashem. Pesach means passing over. Now, I shall go through the land of Egypt on this night, and I shall strike every firstborn in the land of Egypt, from man to beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I shall mete out the punishment. I am Hashem. The blood shall be a sign for you upon the houses where you are. I shall see the blood, and I shall pass over you. There shall not be a plague of destruction upon you when I strike in the land of Egypt. This day shall become a remembrance for you, and you shall celebrate it as a festival for Hashem for your generations. As an eternal decree shall you celebrate it for 7-day period, etc., etc. We'll stop here. So that's what we need to know about the Passover sacrifice. Probably can come up with a few questions. The questions that I said that so far I'm trying to hint at is the one I said explicitly is why does God need blood on the doorpost to tell you that to tell him that these are Jewish people here? He's God, he should know. And also the other question is why do you have to roast it? The Torah seems to be emphasizing it has to be roasted. And what else? What other questions could we have about this? Go ahead.
With I feel like, well, first off, they're slaves, and they're not wealthy. So it's funny that they emphasize that, there shall be no leftovers, and if you have a lot, you should share, because if anything, I assumed that, like even up until like, close to now, people like didn't have much meat, and yeah, always the slaughter would be like a big
Festival.
community
Right.
festival.
Right.
And so it's a given that you're sharing it with everyone, and
Right.
you're lucky if there's enough.
Right. But it's emphasis. Don't keep it for yourself. Do it right away. Don't save. I guess saving could be two things. It could be a scarcity, right? I want to save for tomorrow. So it's the opposite of wealth. But it could also be, and it could be three things. So it could be the opposite of hoarding for yourself because you're not sure if you're going to have tomorrow, right? There's something about saving, which is being responsible for the future. But if the sign of wealth is just to finish it, right? You don't have to save, right? That's one thing. Another thing would be is that if we're in a rush and we're leaving, then you're not going to save anything and store it here because we're moving and you don't want to carry it. That's another thing. Another thing is that's what I alluded to earlier. The quality of the food is going to go down. So on the second day, it's not like today refrigeration, even leftovers, maybe they don't taste as good, but it's okay. There, if you don't eat it quickly, it's gonna get ruined unless you preserve it with salt, but that's a whole nother story. It's almost like a different product. And the point is, when you eat an offering, you're supposed to eat it in a way of celebration and give it honor. So in other words, you want top quality food. And some people say that's actually why the mitzvah, why they have to have bitter herbs. Today we think about the bitter herbs remind us of the slavery. At the Passover Seder, we eat bitter herbs to remind us of the slavery. But the simple interpretation simply could be the sandwich should be nice. If you're eating a Passover offering for Hashem, for God, and celebrating your connection to God, it should be the top quality. And it has to have flavor. And it has to have mustard, not mustard, bitter herbs. And it has to be fresh. And don't eat it tomorrow because tomorrow it's not fresh. So there's different ways of thinking about it. But you're saying that the idea of meat is a luxury. And so therefore, when you do it as a festival and you invite other people. Right, right. So that's good. Okay, so we'll address that in a second. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Let's start with a few points and then we'll see where we branch out to. The first point is the first 2 points I'm going to say are a little bit related, but there's sort of a little bit.
I mean, I guess the blood on the door and the post is like, that also signals to other people that you're Jewish.
Oh, that's a very important point.
So you're showing that you're Jewish. You're proud of your.
Yes. So you're not just hiding it, but you're willing to announce that you're part of this group. Okay, that's very good. That's very good. So let's start from that angle. It's not only that you're saying you're Jewish. I guess in some ways the Hebrews, they were in some ways slaves. So in some ways they were their own, they were identifiable, I guess. But the way the commentaries talk about this is, if you think about this, and again, there's only one way to read it. There's different ways to read everything. Everything I'm about to say and all the proof I'm trying to bring to support could be read other ways. So there could be multiple stories, but let's take one narrative and then we'll come back for other narratives. The first narrative is that to become free from Egypt, you have to defy Egypt. And we talked about this a lot. The Jewish perspective is we're not asking Pharaoh to let us go. We're asking Pharaoh to let us go for 3 days. Give us the opportunity to escape. That's essentially what's happening here. Because we're not saying, let us go, please make us free. Because from our perspective, if the oppressor makes you free, you're not really free. Someone tells me go into prison, I'm in prison. Then he says, you know what? Leave prison. So I leave prison. I'm not free. I'm listening to my oppressor. Today he told me to eat this for lunch. Today's telling me to eat that for lunch. Here he says go into prison. He says no, leave prison. I don't have where's my sense of autonomy? And therefore, to become free, nobody can make me free. Nobody can make you free ever. What you could do is you could take your freedom. How do you take your freedom? Defiance. That I'm going against the current power. And sometimes I can't. If I'm locked in a cell, I can't defy, but I could say, please let me out so I could defy you. That's really what we're telling. And that's part of the problem because Moshe always tells Pharaoh, we only want to leave for 3 days. And ultimately, Pharaoh has to say, you can leave because he's afraid of the 10th plague because he's a firstborn. So Pharaoh's broken. Moshe could have said, when Pharaoh says, get out of town, Moshe could have said, just sign here that we don't have to come back. He doesn't do that. He says, okay, he doesn't say anything about how long we're coming. He doesn't say, but it's still under the assumption probably that we're leaving for 3 days. What happens in 3 days? 3 days, the Jewish people don't return. And then Pharaoh has a change of heart. And then he chases them and finds them at the sea, and there's a splitting of the sea, and the Pharaoh drowns. But the point is, what has to happen here? We need the people to be able to say, we are going against Pharaoh. We're defying Pharaoh. We're not free because Pharaoh frees us. We have to defy Pharaoh. And if you can't get the people to defy Pharaoh, then you could take them out of Egypt, but you're not going to make them free. You can take them geographically out of Egypt, but you're not going to give the spirit of freedom. Spirit of freedom is defiance. Now, if you want to follow that perspective and read that narrative, you could find that in many places. Now, let's take the next step. The goat was the deity of Egypt. There were many deities, but that's one of them. They would serve the animals. When Joseph comes to Egypt, when Joseph's family comes to Egypt, the brothers of Joseph, 200 years earlier, Joseph tells his brothers, tell Pharaoh, we have to live in Goshen. We have to live in a separate region. Why? Because we are shepherds. We raise cattle. And he says it's an abomination for Egypt, those who raise cattle. In Egypt, they didn't raise cattle because they worshipped the cattle in general. Specifically, it was the goat, because the talav, because one of the signs of the zodiac is the tala, the goat, maybe the first one, the spring. So they serve the goats, right? They serve the goat. So what are we doing? We are taking the goat 4 days early. So it makes noise. Everyone, you imagine you go to sleep. Imagine you go home and you have a goat tied to your bed for 4 days, right? So obviously it's going to make noise. And now people are going to say, what's going on? Oh, we need it. Why do you need it? Because we have to slaughter it because God take us out of Egypt. So that's a tremendous act of defiance. Now, what do you do with it? Not only do you hide it in your basement and cook it in your basement, but first of all, you put the blood on the doorposts. What is the blood? The blood is the blood of the deity. So you're slaughtering the deity of the Egyptians. You're not only saying you're Jewish, but you're saying I'm defying and I'm putting it on the blood, on the doorpost. That's an act of rebellion. There could be a pogrom. There could be retaliation. It's an act of tremendous faith to be able to say I'm doing what God says and I'm disregarding the deity of Egypt and we're not afraid of the consequences. Some people actually say that's the roasting issue. What happens when you roast? When you're walking down the street in the summer, all of a sudden, I tell you right away, someone's barbecuing something on my block. If you're cooking dinner in your basement, I have no idea. You're cooking in water, it absorbs the smell, right? Roast automatically. Now, could you imagine the 600,000 people or however, all of a sudden roasting meat, right? So the smell all of a sudden spreads. There's no way to hide this. That's the whole point. We're not hiding this. And the whole story here is a story of we do our own thing in our own way. We're not afraid of the deity of Egypt. We were slaves up to this point. Now we do our own thing, and we're not afraid to hide it. And that is that's a necessary step. Before Pharaoh could free you, you have to free yourself. Then there's a technicality. Pharaoh has to open the lock to let you out of your prison cell. That's a technicality. But the spirit, you have to be able to defy. You have to be prepared to defy, and that has to happen first. And that will explain many of the details. And people who did not put the blood on the doorposts, then you can't be part of the Jewish people leaving Egypt because you have to have that spirit of separating yourself from that culture. Because especially it's a pagan culture, it's a corrupt culture, not just pagan, but it's corrupt, right? It's a whole idea is building on taking advantage of the weaker. That's the whole idea of the hierarchy of Egypt because they have agriculture, and agriculture they need manpower, so they have slave labor, and slavery starts in Egypt. So this is a corrupt society, but you have to be willing to slaughter the society, the deity of the society, if you want to break free and become a Hebrew, become separate, become distinct. And for some people, it's very hard to do, and some people didn't do it, right? But to do it, this is the requirement to join the club. right? And that now we're read this way. Oh, now it's very important. So God is seeing, he does not seeing the Jewish home. He's seeing that this person or these people or this group is ready and prepared to defy. That's very important. That's one way of saying it more in contemporary psychological terms. If you want to say it more in traditional terms, basically it goes like this. The Jewish people at that point, being in Egypt for a long time, they did not assimilate amongst the Egyptians because they were slaves, but they assimilated culturally, right? The tradition is that many of them served idols. And the act of slaughtering the Pesach offering was not just slaughtering the god of the gods of the Egyptians, but for many people, it's the gods that they themselves served, right? So it's a denouncement of idolatry that the Jewish people themselves adopted over the last 200 years in Egypt. So they have to separate themselves. And so the way the Medrash reads it, and I'll read it in Rashi in a moment, on the screen, it's probably here in the English too somewhere. We'll find it in a second. That the Jewish people are, in the language of the prophets, they're naked in the sense that they don't have any spiritual merit. Why are the Jewish people being redeemed? Only because of their ancestors. But what do they do? They're being oppressed. Okay, but what do they do to be deserving of the divine intervention of all these miracles and becoming God's people? They have nothing. So the idea is that God gives them a commandment to make them worthy. Every commandment, you can look at commandments in two ways. You can look at commandments. Torah has 613 commandments. Oh my God. Okay. If you want to read the small details, we can't do many of them because we don't live in Israel. I mean, there's no temple. There's about 87 positive commandments that we could do collectively. If we're not one person can't do all of them because some are for men, some are for women, some are for priests, some are for kings. You can't do all of them. But generally speaking, it's a smaller number. But the point is there's a tremendous amount of commandments. And for some people, it's off-putting, like we're doing commandments all day. Like, what's the point? So you could look at it as a burden. You could look at it as an opportunity of connection to God. So when we say God gives the Jewish people two commandments, it's that they shouldn't be barren of any merit. So God gives them two commandments. What's the commandment? The commandment is the blood Passover offering. Now, if you realize it's rejection of idolatry, that's the negative. Remember, mitzvot, there's always positive and negative. There's 365 negative commandments, things that you don't do, and 248 potentially things that you do. So it's all saying no, saying yes, which is interesting because you can't just say yes, right? You have to be able to say no in general in life because you can't love everybody. You have to get married or have a relationship with one person, right? If I say I love everybody the same, it sounds very universal, it sounds very beautiful. But that means is that you don't love anybody. You don't have a unique, intimate connection with anybody because I love everybody. So what is marriage? Marriage is saying I want to connect to one person, exclusive relationship. But exclusive relationship is saying yes, but it's also saying no. And it's not just marriage. Any commitment is exclusive. It means in the next hour, I'm doing this and I'm not doing something else. If I want to be a musician now, I cannot be something else. I cannot be, I'm playing the piano. I can't play something else at the same time. And if I want to go to medical school, I can't go to law school at the same time. Every act of yes is always an act of no. And if a person cannot say no, can't make boundaries, then they can't commit to anything because they're distracted by the first distraction. So you have to be able to say no in order to say yes. A yes without a no is not a yes. That's the point here. And the modern world, people don't like to see it because everybody wants all their options open all the time. I want to have access to all my apps and all my people and everything all the time. That means there's no commitment. That means there's no relationship. That means there's no growth. Nothing happens. I don't even know how to say this. Nothing happens, right? Every yes has to have a no. So you have to have a no and a yes. Now, slaughtering the animal, the Pesach offering, is the separating from idol worship. That's the no. But the sages also say there's also a yes here. And the yes is, what is the yes? Does it say it here? Let's see. It may not say it here, but we'll say it later, but we imply that it happened here as well. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, yeah, it's going to happen. It's going to happen later. Later on page 361, we read that someone who's uncircumcised, a male who is uncircumcised, cannot eat of the Pesach offering. So the implication is if you're eating of the Pesach offering, you have to have a circumcision. So for the Jewish people, the tradition is that the Jewish people did not circumcise in Egypt. I mean, maybe in the beginning they did, but then it drifted off. So they had to circumcise in order to eat the Pesach offering. By the way, the same thing happens clearly and explicitly in the book of Joshua. While the Jewish people were in the desert for 40 years, they also did not circumcise because it's not safe. But then they entered the land of Israel. Well, in preparation for the entry of the land of Israel, they're already in a safe space. They're already in civilization. They're at the Jericho. They're at the Jordan River opposite Jericho, so the eastern bank of the Jordan outside of Israel. Well, it became Israel, but the point is outside of Israel, the eastern bank of the Jordan, and they're at the Jordan, and that's when God says, okay, now we're going to have a Pesach offering, because in the history of the 40 years they did not have a Pesach. They only had Pesach in Egypt. Then the Torah tells us that they celebrated the first anniversary. That's in the book of Numbers. But after that, they were delayed 40 years in the desert. There was no Pesach. I'm sorry, there was no circumcision and no Pesach because they're tied in. And then the book of Joshua, the opening chapter or chapters, the first, I don't know, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, I don't remember if I remember where the chapters changed, but very early in the book of Joshua, probably even chapter 1, God says we're going to cross the Jordan, we're going to make the Pesach, and we have to circumcise. So circumcision and Pesach always go together because it cannot be, because it's already in this parsha, it says anyone uncircumcised, any male not circumcised, cannot eat the Pesach offering. The point here there is, so there's really two mitzvot. There are two mitzvot that the Jewish people had to do. And it says blood of the Passover, because we don't want to make it too gory, but the sages say it's also the blood of circumcision. So there's two mitzvot. So circumcision is the positive. Why? It's an act. It's painful, but it's an act of covenant, but it's also a representation that we have a connection to God, to God. It's a covenant with God. So the rejecting idolatry is a rejection. It's saying no. But then you say no, and then what's yes? Who are you saying yes to? So that's what the circumcision represents. So that's the same idea that you have. It's not exactly the same terms. It's more of a spiritual terms that you want a relationship with God. There has to be a rejection of the negative and acceptance of the positive. And every mitzvah we do, there's always positive. Even on Shabbat, so many mitzvot in the Torah actually have a positive and a negative. Shabbat is the most clear. It says, remember Shabbat, which is a positive mitzvah, which is sanctify the day, make the kiddush, say this day is holy. And there's also a negative mitzvah, not to do labor. So the same mitzvah could have a positive aspect and a negative aspect. Positive aspect is fill the day with spiritual content, holy content, but it's also say no to doing labor. Because again, if you didn't say no, you didn't make space for the yes. And you always have, now if you can't do it for 24 hours, do it for 1 hour, whatever, that's another discussion. But the point is we understand that in Judaism is very sensitive to the point that there's no such thing as I'm saying yes to everything. A commitment is about saying no. Why do you have to say no? Why can't you just do what everybody's doing? No, you have to say no, because that's what exclusive is. When I was single, I could do all these things. Now I can't. Why? Because I have exclusive relationship. So the same thing is with God. Now there's also a positive. We can't just say, I'm saying no to everybody else. I have to say yes to you. Can't just say, I'm not going to party, but I have to also do something for you. I have to buy you flowers or whatever it is, talk to you. Whatever the case is, there's a negative and there's a positive. And one cannot take the place of the other. And this element of preparation for the Pesach and what the blood represents. So the first thing we said is defiance. That's the one point. That's more of a psychological interpretation, maybe a little bit more modern. It was true then too. In other words, of course, I'm saying it wasn't articulated then. Obviously, it was an act of defiance, and they needed that. But the way the sages articulate it, you'll see in a minute. The way I'll read it inside, I'll read it the translation. It's the idea of the relationship with God and rejection of idol worship and accepting the covenant of circumcision. And that's why this is so important. So it's not God has to see who's a Hebrew, because if he doesn't have the blood, God only sees the blood at night because he has otherwise he can't see what's going on. No, it's not that. It's the people who are committed to make this relationship important to them. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think what you're saying is that Hashem took us out of Egypt, not physically, but before he took us out of Egypt,
Right.
By giving the commandment, he is liberating us. So my question is, today, how do we commemorate other than learning the act of defiance? Is it a commandment in a sense, or this is just because we cannot do what they did at the Exodus? So how do we...
I think every time of making distinction is defiance. You put up a mezuzah on your door. You don't have to sell it as defiance is a strong word, but it's distinction. And what? No, in some cases, no, defiance against oppressor. But I'm saying against your neighbor. When I'm saying I'm different, it's not, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable, right? Why do you want to be different? Who wants to be different? Nobody wants to be different. But in a way, I'm saying I'm distinct. And like if I'm married to one person, then I'm wearing a ring. Okay, I don't know why Orthodox, I don't know why I don't wear a ring, but that's another story. What's the idea of wearing a ring? You're signaling to people that I'm separate. I'm taken. I'm busy. I'm exclusive, right? So it makes people, in a way, it's uncomfortable, right? In other words, you have to say I'm different. Saying I'm different is not easy, especially in this country, which was a melting pot. Unlike other cultures that try to make, other cultures, I don't know, they try to say like, the Jewish experience in other cultures is different, right? You go to Canada, they never tried to make a melting pot. It was like a mosaic. They have all different cultures coming together. But in America, at least at the turn of the 20th century, it was all about a melting pot. And people came here, and what they wanted to do is they wanted to assimilate culturally and be seen as American first, and be seen that. And I don't want to stick out that I'm Jewish and I'm different. And people got offended when you put up a big menorah and you're sort of advertising Judaism. No, let's hide it. But I'm saying to come and declare that I'm Jewish is different. Vicky's from the Soviet Union. You know that they had it on your passport that you're Jewish. It's an act of distinction. It's not always comfortable, but in a way, the defiance is a strong word depending on who. But it's the ability to say I'm different. And if you could say you're different, then you have to now defend that. How am I different? Why am I different? What am I doing to I don't want to say justify. What am I doing am I in touch with my unique character, with my unique contribution or my unique gifts that I can then say I'm different I feel different because I feel distinct because I'm connected to my heritage. So then I have to be connected to my heritage, right? Then I have to do something to say, yes, I'm different because what? Oh, because I have a heritage, because I have a culture. Okay, so then I have to adapt that heritage and culture, at least in some way. But I'm saying in a way today, in 2026, to say I'm different, that's defiance.
I feel like that's like why I relate to the Jewish people, is because in the places I've been, I've always been different.
Right.
Like such a mix of cultures. And so it is almost like I was a literal black sheep in Slovakia. And
Right.
so I relate to that, kind of being from all over, and then, yeah.
Yeah, so they're not being afraid to be different is something that the Jewish people, the Jewish person's experience is always to be different, either by choice or sometimes we wanted to assimilate, but then we were um, set apart and not by choice but by persecution, right? Not everybody, many people wanted to assimilate, but they weren't allowed to. And when the Holocaust, people that were two generations away from Judaism, they were still persecuted just like all Jews. But the idea, going back to even the etymology of the word Hebrew, because before we were Jews is more of a modern word. We were children of Israel, but initially the first Jews, Abraham and Sarah, were not Jews; they were Hebrews. And even all throughout the book of Genesis, they refer to them as the Hebrews. The Hebrews can eat with the Egyptians. So, what does the word Hebrew mean? Hebrew, Ivri in Hebrew is Ivri. So the etymology is literally it's being from the other side. And the reason is because Abraham and Sarah come from Haran, they come from Turkey, and God says, Lech lecha, leave your birthplace and migrate to the land of Israel. So when they came to the land of Israel, they're from the other side of the river. Well, they came to Turkey. Before Turkey, they're from probably Ur Kasdim, which is Baghdad, which is between the two rivers, Tigris and the Euphrates, but they're from the other side of the river. So the point is, they are Hebrews, they're from the other side. Now, so they're foreigners, they're newcomers. But the sages say it wasn't that they came from the other side of the river. Many people came from the other side of the river. That wouldn't give them the name. Hebrew means that theologically and culturally they were from the other side. Abraham was preaching monotheism, separating himself from everybody else. So from the very beginning, to be a Hebrew is someone who's not afraid to be distinct from everybody else and speak their own truth and live their own truth, even though they're the minority and sometimes overwhelming minority. And that's what a Hebrew is. That's what Abraham did. So the way the sages put it, Abraham is on one side of the river, and the rest of humanity is the other side of the river. When he preached monotheism, there was no one on his team. He had no numbers. He was a one man alone. Him, his wife, they were two people alone against everybody else. And that is the story of the Hebrew to one degree or another. Because saying I am Jewish is saying I am distinct, I am different, I am minority. Now, some people were trying to hide it, some people celebrate it, some people love it. It doesn't really matter. But being Jewish is, in a way, an act of distinction. And you have to be, I don't say you have to be comfortable, but ultimately that's the Jewish experience. And Yeah, I don't think you should run away. I think the thing is you can't just say I'm distinct. That would be the negative distinction, but then you have to fill it up with positive content. So then if you are Jewish and if you have a culture, a history, and if you have a culture, and if you have a tradition, so then you want to connect to that to feel the blessing of the distinction. And remember, it doesn't mean we're better. It doesn't mean we're better. It means we're different. And we resist the melting pot. We resist the idea that all people are equal. Yes, all people are equal. We're all created in the image of God, but everybody in every culture has their unique gift. And maintaining that distinction is what makes beauty. Beauty is not one color. Beauty are the many colors. That ties into the story of the rainbow with after the flood, with what God says, Noach, that the rainbow is a symbol of peace, because every person and every culture is supposed to be distinct and is supposed to celebrate their own uniqueness. It's not that one is better than the other. So coming back full circle is that I think Vicky said, what's the act of being defiant today? Just saying that I am a Jew and you're pushing against the force of, first of all, 8.5 billion people, however many billion, 7.5, 8 billion people. In other words, you're a very small minority, but you're also living in a culture that doesn't celebrate this. So you're saying I'm distinct. Nobody wants to be distinct. Nobody wants to be distinct, right? It's very hard to do.
So are we translating that these to kind of preserve our own identity and
Yeah.
at the time reject idolatry and embrace connection to Hashem?
In a way, it ties the same way, because if you're preserving, I'm not saying everyone else is idol worshippers, they're not. But I'm just saying, use cultural idols. That's a different story. But I'm just saying, if I am saying I am unique, I have to say I'm not just buying into what's to the popular culture or the popular perspective. So that's an act of defiance, but it's also an act of connecting. So what am I connecting to? So what am I? How do I identify? What is my inner identity? What is my culture? What is my perspective? So we live in a culture, maybe there's no idol worship in a literal sense, because thank God, this part of the world we have monotheism through Christianity, through Islam. So we're not, people are not pagans. And the problem with pagans, without getting into, I don't want to bash the pagans, but the problem with pagans is that there's no universal truth. There's no universal morality. Is my God against your God? Your God, there's different groups, and therefore, my God doesn't mind if I kill you because you're from a different God. We have to have one universal truth that applies to everybody, and that's where human rights comes from. All people are created in the image of God, and therefore all people have, human rights. So there has to be the idea of unity, right? Without that, go ahead.
So Sarah was from Canaan, though. Is that
Sarah wasn't from? They went to Canaan. They came to Canaan. Initially, Sarah's from where Abraham was from, which is, it's not exactly clear. Haran. They start before Haran. They could have been in before he married in Ur Kasdim. Most people think Ur Kasdim is in Iraq, is in Baghdad. In other words, between the two rivers. Sometimes it's called Aram Naharaim. Nahar is river. Naharaim is plural, rivers. Then they come from then they come from there to go to Canaan. On the way, they stop in Haran. They're delayed there, and then God says, "Okay, now go to Canaan." So they come to Canaan,
which is Israel?
Okay. Canaan there was really 7 nations living there. Canaan was the most dominant, so they call it the land of Canaan. And all throughout the book of Genesis, all throughout the Torah, it's the land of Canaan or the land of the 7 nations. It will list Canaani, Amori, Perizi, Yebusi, Girgashi. No, they were not referred to as Hebrews. They weren't referred to as Hebrews because they were the locals. When we came there, we become the Hebrews, right?
Just Abraham.
Yes, the first person where it says, now there is an earlier name, Aver. So I'm not sure exactly if there was a people or a family called Hebrews, but in this part of the world, they were the only Hebrews. Yeah. Okay. So it's 12:59. We have 1 minute left. I want to read that Rashi inside because it's very poetic, and it quotes from different prophets. I'm going to share it on the screen. Exodus chapter 12, verse 6. Let's see if it's it is here in the English, but I'm going to read it in my own in the original version. Here they have it on page 351. On the second paragraph, 351, under the line, lower, in other words, under the line on the right side, second paragraph, Rabbi Masya ben Harash, but I'm not going to read it here because this is the way the Art Scroll shows to write it up. I'm going to read it in the original translation. Let's just find it very quickly. Chapter 12, verse 6. Give me just a second. Chapter 12, verse 6. Let's show Rashi. Okay. Chapter 12, verse 6, I'm putting it on the screen. I'm going to read it. Here we go. I'm starting from the beginning. You shall keep it for inspection. Hebrew limishmeret. This is an expression of inspection. That is, the animal requires an inspection for a blemish for 4 days before slaughter. Okay, now it starts. Now, why was it the designated animal to be taken 4 days before its slaughter? Something not required in the Passover sacrifice of later generations. Right? Later generations, many of the laws are the same. Many of the laws of the later generations Passover are the same, but some are different. The first difference is in Egypt, we had to take it 4 days early, but in the later Passovers, we don't have to take it 4 days early. So here's Rabbi Masya, son of Charash. He was a Talmudic sage, or a sage of the Mishnah, early times of the Talmud. Rabbi Masya, the son of Charash, used to say in response, "Behold, he, God says," and this is from a verse from Ezekiel 16, referring to the Jewish people in Egypt, "And I passed by you and saw you, and behold, your time was the time of love," meaning God wants the relationship. "The time of the fulfillment of the oath that I swore to Abraham, that I would redeem his children, has arrived. But the children of Israel had no commandments in their hands with which to occupy themselves in order that they be redeemed." In other words, they have no merits. They have nothing positive to do. They were just slaves, part of the Egyptian culture. They had no relationship with God. As it is said, that same verse in Ezekiel, the verse previous, "And you were naked and bare," Ezekiel 16:7, meaning we have no commandments. We have no merits. So he, meaning God, gave them 2 mitzvot, the blood of Passover and the blood of the circumcision. They circumcised themselves on that night, as it is said, "Downtrodden with your blood." Again, same verse 6. Now, Ezekiel chapter 16 talks about the Exodus in very terms of giving birth, etc. So it's very visual. But here we're interpreting it. The blood is the blood of God came and he showed we're downtrodden with blood. So that's the blood of, with the 2 types of blood. Damayich is plural, bloods, not blood, but bloods. That he God states also, "You too, with the blood of your covenant, I have freed your prisoners from a pit with which there was no water." That's the prophet Zechariah. But the point is there, it says the blood of your covenant, not the blood of the Passover, but the covenant. Circumcision is called the covenant of circumcision. "Moreover, they, the Israelites, were passionately fond of idolatry. Moses said to them, 'Withdraw and take for yourselves.'" That's the name of that's the literal translation. Mishru, withdraw and take for yourselves. What's the word withdraw? When it says take for yourself the goat or the kid and the goat or the sheep for a Passover offering, what's withdraw? Say take. So the word withdraw says this Talmudic sage, Rav Matya ben Charash, he meant withdraw from idolatry and take for yourself sheep of the mitzvah. This comes from the Mechilta here in verse 21. Okay, so that's the point here. So you got it, Rashi himself. You don't have to hear it from me. This idea of separating yourself and taking, separating yourself from idolatry and taking the mitzvah, and the mitzvah would include the mitzvah of the circumcision and the mitzvah of the Passovers. And why is it? Rashi doesn't explicitly answer why do you need 4 days. Doesn't say 4 days to occupy yourself in the mitzvah. And again, defiance to defy for 1 minute is easy. To defy for 4 days is a little harder. So that's really what's happening here. Of course, there's so much more to say, but we went over time, which I got to run. I apologize. Thank you all for joining in person and online. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. Take care.